Well, hello again. This is our second talk, 10-minute talk in the series on the Bible for every man. And if you may remember last time, in number 1, we looked at Jerusalem, which had various names in the past, like Salem and Aelia Capitolina in the Roman times, and how the name of Jerusalem the meaning was a vision for the future, which is what Jerusalem means, and how that vision hasn't come to pass yet, but it's a promise of good things that God has said will come to pass on this earth. So today we're going to look at something of Jerusalem for the future, because as we've said, she hasn't always had that name of Jerusalem, and she won't always have it in the future either. In fact, in the last verse of the last chapter of the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament of the Bible, it says that the name of Jerusalem will be changed one day in the future to "the Lord is here," or if we go to the Hebrew, Yahweh Shammah, which means "he who will be is here." Now, this is a promise of what God intends to do with the future when he intends to bring his glory onto the earth again in a temple that will be built in Jerusalem, the third temple, because we had one temple in the days of the Babylonians, we had another temple in the days of Herod the Great in the Roman times. That was destroyed in AD 70. And there is to be a third temple, which is described in the book of Ezekiel in the last 8 chapters of the prophet Ezekiel. In detail, the plans of the temple are already there. It'll be a big temple, a mile square approximately, have corner towers, have feasting rooms. There'll be a centre area where only the immortals will be able to go. And into the outer courts, people from all around the world will go up from year to year to keep feasts and to remember God and to learn his ways. Now, there's a lot in the prophets on this. Isaiah 2, where the nations are pictured as going up to Jerusalem to learn his law. We have Zechariah 14, where it says that the nations will go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, the Feast of Tabernacles is not something that we're familiar with at all, being not Israelites or Jews, but it was a feast that the Israelites used to celebrate once a year to commemorate their deliverance out of Egypt. And it was a joyful occasion when they made outdoor camping booths, and the whole family stayed outdoors and had a fun time and a really good time. And it was a time of joy and feasting and happiness. There's a lot of passages in the Bible that actually speak of this. And this Feast of Tabernacles will be still have to be kept in the age to come when Christ returns. As prophet Zechariah says this in the 14th chapter. But here's some passages regarding the feasting of those times. The new moon feasts, which all nations will have to keep in those times, from one new moon to another, says Isaiah, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. Now, you tell me in the history of the earth when this has ever taken place, when all the nations of the earth have had to come from one new moon to another, that's every month, have had to come up to Jerusalem, to this mountain of the glory of God in Jerusalem, to keep this Feast of Tabernacles and to have joy and happiness there in feasting and for all the things that God has given us, in particular from the fruits of the earth. There will actually also be alcoholic beverages consumed in the precincts of the temple as well. Isaiah 62 and verse 9 says that, although in some ways, this is with the sort of feasting with alcohol that goes on today, we don't look forward to that aspect of it because of the association with drunkenness and abuse that has gone on with the misuse of alcohol these times. But there it is in Isaiah 62 verse 9 that it will be done in a controlled environment and in the right spirit and for the right purpose, and it will not be abused in that way, but it will be what it's supposed to be used for and what God's provided it for, as well as the food will not be abused either in these feasts. Psalm 27 verse 6 says, I will offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. And in the margin, that actually means shouting. So there will be actually loud displays of happiness and joy in the kingdom of God for every people, nation and tongue that comes up to Jerusalem to keep these feasts. Every month there'll be people coming from around the world to keep them. Joy and gladness was in the cheerful feast in Israel, and it will be so again. Zechariah 8 verse 19. And this involved also for the Israelites in the past as well, which will be reinstituted, worshipping with, if you're thinking that it's not wine and strong drink, have a look at Deuteronomy 14 verse 26. I know there are a lot of people that don't like to partake of alcohol these days, and for very good reason, not to be involved with the drunkenness and debaucheries of a dissident, deteriorating lifestyle. But in this age, it will be properly used and properly controlled, as we've said. Deuteronomy 14:26, to worship in the feast with wine and strong drink. Also, God says in Zephaniah 3 verse 17, I will joy over you with singings. So there'll be music associated with it too, and instruments, and even dancing if we were to look at Psalm 149, which we're not going to do this time. Now, one writer, on considering these passages and what will happen in the future, he wrote these words: the monthly reoccurrence of special feasts of praise and joy and blessing is, the prospect is that the kingdom of God will be an endless succession of joyful activities. And as an example of this, you could compare Ezra chapter 3 verse 11 and chapter 6 verse 22. Now, this is all while people are learning God's ways, which involves temperance and control and other qualities as well, like faith and love and patience and these other virtues which people are to learn and be required to go up to this house of God to learn. But before this can happen, and before the nations begin to send their money into Jerusalem to this house, which Isaiah says, the wealth of the nations, including the Arab nations, there's a lot of wealth in the Arab nations. In fact, there's so much wealth in the world today that if it was shared out between the world's population, men, women and children, there'd be enough for $3 million per head of population on the earth at the moment, which just shows that the wealth is being held by too few and not dispersed in wise ways for the benefit of the population of the earth. But those times will be different. There'll be times of stability and wisdom. And if you look at Psalm 72, it shows there how that the Lord's Son, when he returns, will bring this equity to the earth and peaceful times. Now, before all this happens, and the Lord is actually there with his glory in the temple, there has to be some big changes take place. And this is the purpose of a 40 or 50 year period that will lead up to this establishment and opening of the temple. So we'll look at this in our next little clip. So thanks very much for watching.